Welcome to SolarTechDIY.com. This is Patrick speaking. Today we are going to cover determining the length of your tabbing wire strips for joining solar cells, specifically joining them into pairs. Now, solar cells can be measured, or length can be determined by simply doubling the width of the solar cell. We are looking at 3-inch by 6-inch polycrystalline solar cells. Remember, a tabbing wire has to go across the bus bar on the negative sun-facing side of the solar cell. It must cross the gap and then extend to this backmost bus tab. Now, not all solar cells are the same. Here we have a solar cell that is a polycrystalline of the same measurement, but yet it's slightly different in terms of the bus tabs on the back of the solar cell. Now, this particular solar cell would require a tabbing wire slightly longer because this type ends a good 1/2 inch before the edge of the cell. Conversely, this type bus tab almost travels to the far side of the cell, and it would require a longer piece of tabbing wire. So just keep that in mind. And the nice thing about using the combination square to determine the length of the tabbing wire is that it's adjustable, and you can take many factors into account that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do with, say, a ruler or a cloth tape measure. Now, in the instruction manual, I suggest you use a combination square. This is a combination square. They come in different shapes, sizes, and they all look generally the same. But the feature that makes them so useful for us is this width. You see this gap here? This allows us to set the combination rule down, combination square, and then slide the ruler into position without ever touching the solar cells. So we minimize the opportunity to scratch them, and it's just a more effective way of keeping your cells safe. So what I'm going to do is show you how to do the measurements for both types of solar cells. So we don't want to set our combination square directly on top of the cell. These are fragile, about the durability of a Pringles potato chip. So if I were to set this metal onto the fragile silicone wafer, that may crack it. So what we're going to do is set it out in front, because with this particular type of bus tab on the back, remember, we only need to go to the back of the bus tab. So we don't want to touch our solar cell with the combination square, so we're going to use just a little implement to make sure we're reasonably close, which we are. And remember, we want to leave a little bit of extra because we're going to make that tension bend in the center. Remember, we want to accommodate temperature extremes which may cause expansion or contraction, and by making the tension bend in your tabbing strip, you allow the cells to move in response to temperature extremes without causing micro cracks. Now, cutting your tabbing strips can be done all at once. For example, we know now the length of the tabbing strip for this particular configuration is before us. Now that we've established the length, we want to tighten the locking nut on our combination square so it doesn't move, because now we're going to measure our tabbing wire. So I have our tabbing wire roll staged right next to my work surface. And the way we make the mark on where to cut, we simply lay the tabbing wire down on top of the T-square, on top of the combination square ruler portion, hold it in position, and you'll notice here at the end where my finger is bouncing, that's a nice distinct edge. So what we're going to do is just use our finger and push gently over the lip, and that gives us a nice sharp point of embarkation. We know exactly where to make our cut, so we're going to do that. Now, a word of caution, one size does not fit all, as we just illustrated. What I'm going to do is remove this cell and replace it with the one that has the longer bus tabs, and I'll illustrate why you need to really measure. If we just used a 6 1/4 inch measurement, we would be short. So if you look at the end point for this other configuration of bus tabs, we would be depriving ourselves of the full generating capacity of this solar cell if this tabbing strip didn't extend to the back of the bus tab. So keep that in mind, and when you're making your cuts, just be cognizant of what type of bus tabs are on the back of your solar cell. Now, by contrast, we're going to put the original back, and I'm going to show you the difference. Now, we haven't made our tension spring bend yet, but as you can see, we have exactly the length we need to the back of the bus tab on the positive side of the rightmost solar cell, all the way to the edge of the negative sun-facing cell, and there's enough room in there to make our tension spring cut. Now, another minor point I want to mention is that I'm soldering on a wood surface. Now, if you read my instruction manual, I make great emphasis on the preference for soldering on glass of some sort, whether it's a mirror, a piece of a broken tabletop. Glass is just an excellent surface to work on because it dissipates heat very effectively, which helps preserve the solar cells, which can crack if too much heat is applied. So I'm using an alternate work surface. I'm using a piece of pine board. And I want to show you how I keep the solar cells very straight. I've affixed a 3-foot long wooden yardstick. As you can see, it's from Ace Hardware, as are most all of my tools, all of my accoutrements, everything you see here probably came from Ace. Excellent hardware store. Piece of America, still in action. Now, this is an easy apparatus to make. Simple pine board, 3 feet long by 8 inches wide. Make sure it's 8 inches wide, I don't want to lie to you. It is 7 inches wide, and it doesn't suffer any ill effects from the heat from the solder gun. It's a nice clean piece of wood, and more important, I have a very clean edge to work with. You want your solar cell strings to be very straight, because when they lay down in the substrate, any curvature becomes pretty obvious and will affect how the solar panel lays and how the strings fit. So you want it as straight as possible. This is just my way. You may have your own way. You may have something better in mind. There is no absolute right way. You do what works. And if you can get a straight string, then by all means, if it's comfortable, then do it. Whatever works within reason. Now, another point, you see my bare hands. you will see people wearing gloves in YouTube videos, and sometimes that's a good idea. I personally wash my hands. I make sure I have no impurities, no oil, grease, and it keeps the cells relatively clean. These are very fragile. If I was reckless, I would break one here for you. Let's be reckless. This is about $1, so I'm going to show you. It shatters with basically zero pressure applied. So you can handle them, but be gentle. Pick them up flat if you can. Hold them by the edges so you don't contaminate the surfaces with grease or oil from your hands. And you'll see me handling them and possibly think I'm being overly rough. But here's the irony. They're incredibly fragile if bent in a particular way, but oddly they survive incredible handling sometimes. It's just be careful when you handle them. Wash your hands, and if you feel more comfortable with gloves, then by all means, wear gloves. That's it for now. Thank you. Tune in again where we will be soldering tabbing wire to individual cells, followed by creating the pairs. Thank you for joining me. Have a good day, good luck, and stick with it. You're making progress.